Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Sound Recording Part 2, Editing, Evaluating, and Managing Your Sound Files plus Top Recording Tips. I am Lisa Sorensen, Executive Director of Birds Caribbean. We're delighted to have you join us. Today's webinar is a follow-up to webinar we hosted in late March. That one was called Introduction to Sound Recording, How You Can Help Fill the Caribbean's Data Gaps. This webinar was presented in English and Spanish, and we encourage you to watch part 1 if you've not yet seen it. And in a minute, I'll put the YouTube links in the chat for both those webinars. In part 1, our presenters, Colin Hanks and Jay McGowan from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, gave an excellent overview of Merlin and Bird Sound ID, how recordings are being used by science, and how to make your own sound recordings to contribute to the Macaulay Library and advance conservation in the Caribbean. Colin pointed out that Cornell and Macaulay Library, they need a minimum of 150 recordings to train the models for Sound ID, and we are in fact lacking in recordings for many Caribbean resident and endemic species. We hope that many of you were inspired to go out and start making recordings and uploading them with your eBird checklists after this webinar. Today in part 2, Colin and Jay will give a live demonstration on what to do after you've made a recording, from organizing your files to basic editing and uploading to eBird and the Macaulay Library. Colin will start out with an overview and introduction, and this will be followed by Jay leading us through the process of editing a sound file and uploading to eBird with your checklist. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A panel, or you can raise your hand, and during some breaks during the presentations, we will call on you and give you a chance to turn on your camera and answer and ask the question live. And then before we move on to the next section, and then we will also have a longer Q&A session and discussion after the presentations are completed. So don't worry, we will answer your questions if we miss you during the presentation. For those of us joining live from Facebook, you can also ask your questions there, and we'll try to monitor that and make sure that your questions get answered by the end of the session. So today you'll also learning about training opportunities for annotators, including a session that will be happening tonight, which you're welcome to join. So just a little bit about our presenters today. Colin Hanks. Colin is the partner network lead for eBird, Merlin Bird ID, and the Macaulay Library. He is a lifelong birder from the Gulf Coast of Texas, whose interest in nature led to a career focused on birds and conservation. His primary role at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is to support the network of partners that use eBird and Merlin tools to engage communities and birds and collect useful data for research and conservation efforts. Jay McGowan is a project leader at the Macaulay Library, specializing in sound recording and media archives. He's a passionate birder and sound recordist from upstate New York. He plays many roles at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, including choosing and editing Merlin content, training Merlin Sound ID, and leading sound recording workshops and expeditions, all with the goal of helping others discover the magic of recording birds and increasing the quantity and quality of their recordings. So without further ado, I will let Colin begin our presentations today. Thank you so much, Colin and Jay.
All right, can you see my my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for having us back. It's really exciting to join you all, although I do wish we were joining you in the Caribbean instead of online. And thank you, everybody, for joining. So, as Lisa said, last time we talked quite a bit about the importance of recording. And this time we're going to really focus on what to do with your recordings after you get back or after you're done recording. But before I go further, I do want to mention that we do have a session going over a lot of the same information. Si prefieres español, puedes unirnos por el jueves de edición que va a cubrir cómo puedes editar sus sonidos y Fabricio Goleri va a hacerlo esta noche. Esto es información y creo que Fabricio va a poner algo en el chat. So again, just a kind of a reminder, a little bit of what we talked about last time. We work for the Macaulay Library, where we have an archive of millions of photos and sounds. This is part of eBird, and this collective data set, our goal is to support research and conservation as well as the birding community. All of these sounds are available online for you to explore. You can explore all the sounds for the Caribbean. You can look at sounds and photos for a particular species, and we certainly hope that you do. There, we've been talking a lot about Sound ID recently, but there's a lot of different reasons why we want strong representation of birds in the collection. And this is a great example. Sounds are oftentimes really important for understanding the relationships between different populations. And here are two relatively recent splits in the Caribbean that use sounds where the Sound Archive played a role in understanding the difference between these populations. The Sound Archive also acts as a way of keeping track of which birds are maybe falling off the radar. And this is the Lost Birds program uses our archive to identify birds that haven't been detected over 10 years that may need attention to focus more monitoring effort. But Merlin Sound ID is is a big project that we're working on. And last time I don't think the sound was working, and so I'm going to give an example here of what Sound ID looks like if you haven't used it. This is a tool that we hope to put into people's hands to help them learn how to detect and identify birds around them. Merlin Sound ID covers the majority of species already in the Caribbean. However, it's very biased. That coverage is very biased towards North American species, and it's really missing many of the species that are exclusively found in the Caribbean. And that's one of the reasons that we're working with Birds Caribbean to support sound recording. And so last time we talked about the importance of getting out sound recording. And I can report that some of the species that we highlighted, we've seen a measurable increase in sound recording. So in April, when we did our webinar, Lesser Antillean bullfinch only had 51 recordings. Already it has 64 recordings. So we have a ways to go. But just in 2 months, we've seen a significant increase in the representation of that species in the archive. Hispaniolan woodpecker went from 90 to 102. Puerto Rican lizard cuckoo went from 72 to over 100 recordings. And so this is something that when we all go out there, we can really make a difference for these species. I want to report that last time I mentioned we had the sound recording challenge. The winner of that sound recording challenge was from Mexico, Noe Munoz Padilla. He won a new sound recorder and microphone for sound recording. And we have just launched a new sound recording challenge for the next 3 months. If you can record at least 30 different species, you'll be in the running to win your own new set of recording gear. Now, as I said, we're going to be focusing on what to do when you get back from sound recording. How do you manage these sounds? And so Jay is going to lead us through a real world example of how to edit a sound. And when we talk about editing sounds, what we're really talking about primarily is how do we make sure that we're making that sound accessible by removing the parts that aren't relevant, maybe the handling noise at the beginning and the end, so that when we share that sound, we're actually focusing on the part of the sound that has the bird sound we're interested in. So that's trimming. The other part is normalizing, which means boosting the signal to an appropriate level so that people can hear the bird. Jay's going to talk more about editing sounds and how to do that. But the other part of it is evaluating and documenting what's in that sound, because to make that sound accessible, It's also about helping people understand what you were recording so that people can use it appropriately. And this means that, when you record a bird, telling us what that species is and the date and the location, but also additional information about whether it was a call or a song, and what was going on with the behavior of the bird. For example, here's a recording of a palm tanager that was recorded in somebody's backyard, and they added a lot of value to this recording by letting us know about what was going on in that recording. The bird was singing, they were begging nestlings. That helps people interpret and use these recordings more effectively. Another great example of this is Lawrence's thrush. There's a recording from Brazil. Lawrence's thrush is an interesting species that likes to mimic other species. And in this case, the recordist documented what all the other species that it was mimicking. But this, if you just listen to this recording, you might not know, was this the thrush? Were these other birds singing in that recording? Providing those media notes provide a lot of value in helping people interpret sound recordings and use them correctly. The last thing I'll mention is that all the information that we're covering today is available in our resources on the Macaulay Library, with information on recording, editing, managing your files. In addition, we have an online sound recording course that Macaulay Library, How to Record Bird Sounds. Normally, this course costs $100, but we have a code, Caribbean Sound 25, that will allow you to take this course for free. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay McGowan.
Cool. Thanks, Cullen. That was a great kind of reminder of some of the reasons that we feel sound recording is important and how you can become involved. So what we really want to dive into today is, yeah, like Cullen said, what do you do when you get back from the field? You've made your recordings. Maybe they were good, maybe they weren't so good. How do you know? And what do you do with them? Because it's really easy to get excited about sound recording, go out, record birds. It's a lot of fun. But if you don't do anything with those recordings, if they just sit on your computer, on your phone, on your hard drive, they're really not doing that much good for you, for scientists, or for the birds. So what we're going to step through today is kind of how do you manage those files a little bit? What are these editing steps, and what programs can we use to accomplish them? And why is that important? And then the importance of uploading those recordings to an eBird checklist and thereby contributing them to the Macaulay Library so that you have access to them. We have access to them for building tools like Sound ID, and birders and researchers can access them and listen to them at any point as well. So, I should also say I'm definitely open to questions during this. I'll try to take a pause partway through for some questions, but please do throw your questions in the chat or Q&A section, and we'll make sure to address some of them. And at the end, we can hopefully do have people turn their cameras on and have some direct conversations and questions as well. We definitely want this to be a conversation. This isn't just us, telling you the right way to do things at all. But we can share some of our experiences and what we found works well. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen then and walk through some ideas for editing sounds. So first off, we want a sound editing program. And the thing that we recommend, there's a lot of good ones out there. Adobe Audition is very fancy, a little expensive, but if you have access to that, that's what we use here a lot of the time. This one, Osen Audio, we found works really well. It's free. You can use it on Mac or PC. And a lot of its functions are very similar to the Adobe one, and so it's worked really well for somebody getting into sound recording who wants to perform these steps. There's also Audacity, which works well as well, and a bunch of other ones. So, highly recommend Osen Audio here. And then before we get into that too much, I guess let's talk just a little bit about file management, because people often ask, like, how should I be managing my files? Should I be like renaming them really elaborately? Should I put them all into one folder? Like, what's the best way to do it? Ultimately, it's definitely up to you how you like to, manage things and keep track of them. But I'll just share what I do kind of, and some tips there. I really recommend, especially if you're using a dedicated sound recorder, right, that's making files on an SD card. I recommend downloading frequently. I recommend making backups of those files, right? You never know when a card is going to fail, or even a hard drive. So I always like to have two versions of files. And I like to put them. So here's an example of one of my trips, where I have a folder of photos and a folder of audio here. And I like to have a folder by day. And that really helps me keep track of, like, these are the recordings I made on this certain date. And then within there, if I haven't done any editing, then they'll just be the list of files that the recorder has created. And you could also, for example, name that folder with the locations you went to, things like that. Um, I generally have good eBird checklists, so as long as I have the date, I pretty much know where I'm going to be talking about. And then within one of those folders, once I've started to edit the files, we'll talk more about this when we get to saving a file. But I've added species names to my sort of edited versions. So for me, the unnamed version is the raw file, and then this named version is the one that I've actually edited and am ready to upload to my eBird checklist. So that's just kind of one thought of how to organize things. I recommend keeping some version of the original name as much as possible. I really don't recommend just calling it Bananaquit 1 and saving it to your desktop. That works if you're only making one or two files, but it can get very confusing. You might lose track of where the metadata is, which checklist to put it on. You'll probably record a Bananaquit again at some point, and then which one is the newer one. So the more you can. At the same time, though, I don't recommend putting all of the metadata. And again, the metadata is that information that Cullen was talking about, the date and the time, species, but also the location and the behavior. I don't recommend putting that all in the file name, just because you can spend a lot of time adding things to the file name, and then at the point that you're ready to upload it to your eBird checklist, you sort of have to put all of that into that media again. So I like a sort of a balance. Put enough in that I can make sure it gets to the right checklist on the right day under the right species, and then the rest I'll put in when I go to upload it. So we'll look at that in a bit. Cool. So yeah, we happy to take questions on file management later on, but let's dive right into our editing software. So here's that program I was showing you, Ocean Audio. And you might have to rearrange things or change the panel size a little bit to get it to look like this, but this is kind of roughly how I would recommend. And so then to get the files in there, we can have our folder. So let's say this is one of our days kind of, and we can drop a file just right into the program. You can drop multiple ones if you wanted to, and they will all open up here on the side. And then you can kind of move through them to look at them. And you might see when you first start up the program, it might look more like this. So this is one way to look at a sound, and this is called a waveform. And basically uh, what this view is showing you is amplitude, right? Volume. It's showing you loud thing, loud thing, loud thing, quieter part, loud, loud, loud. And Cullen, maybe you can tell me if you can hear my audio. Is that coming through? Cool.
Yep.
This is a bird in the eastern United States called an eastern whippoorwill, because it says whippoorwill, whippoorwill. So you can see in this case, because the recording is relatively clean and it's a repeating pattern, this waveform tells us something about the sound, but it's only kind of giving us part of the picture. So if we look at another view, this is our spectrogram view, and this is giving us a bit more information about what's going on, because it's actually showing us not just amplitude across time, but amplitude within a frequency across time. And so we can see this kind of distinctive shape of each note, as well as more subtle things like this little, like soft little grunt that the bird does before each loud whippoorwill phrase. So this spectrogram, as I'm sure you've seen on eBird Checklist, Macaulay Library, on Merlin, lots of other places, this is kind of the default way that people like to visualize sound, often in conjunction with that waveform view. And it really gives us a nice picture and allows us to kind of see what's going on in a recording in a way that is hard to if we're just listening or just looking at that waveform. For editing, I really like using both. So I'll usually have both. I'll usually minimize this waveform a little bit to focus mostly on the spectrogram, but I find it is pretty useful to see those shapes, but also see what's loudest and what that might mean for what I need to do for editing. Cool. I guess let's just take a moment and see if there are any questions related to kind of visualizing sound, just because this might be a little bit new for some of you. And we'll talk more about what that means for evaluating and editing in a minute, as well as how to navigate the program. But let's just pause for a moment and see if anyone has any questions about what we're actually looking at here. Somebody have the chat up, or if anybody wants to pop their camera on and ask a question, please feel free to do that.
Not seeing any questions here on Facebook right now. Jay,
Okay.
we can probably move on.
All right. Fair enough. Cool. Okay. Let's do it then. Okay, so navigating within the program. One thing that, again, before we even get to talking about the actual editing steps, I really want to go over how to set up this program, because it's pretty helpful to set up a couple different things. And there's going to be two sections we want to look at. We want to look at the settings, the spectrogram settings and the program settings, and then also the what are on this program called key bindings, I would normally refer to as keyboard shortcuts. And so these are basically ways to use the keyboard on your computer to speed up the editing process, because it really, if you have to go up and press play each time, for example, or if you have to go find something in the menu, it's going to take a lot longer than if you just set a hotkey to do that action every time you hit it. And I think you'll quickly realize that if you start editing some sound files. So first off, so I'm on a Mac here, by the way, so that the menu will look a little bit different on a PC, but all these same options should be there. But if we go to preferences, you can go to spectrogram, and we can take a look at some of the options here. So for example, let me just pull up a different example here just to look at. Yeah, let's take a look at this one. Spectrogram. So we can, for example, look the number of bins. This basically just has to do with how the spectrogram is calculated. Like, are we emphasizing more so the time slices or the frequency slices? So you could see if we scroll through the bins, you change the resolution that you're looking at things. So now we have very good time resolution, very bad frequency resolution, and everything is kind of just smeared. And whereas if we go too far in the other direction, same thing is true. Frequency resolution is great, but the time resolution is so coarse we no longer are able to really see what's going on. So we want this number of bins to be somewhere in the middle, usually somewhere in the 500 range. Typically works well, depending on the recording. Looks like in this case, maybe even 512 looks good. Window type is, again, just a different sort of algorithm of how things are calculated. Blackman-Harris works pretty well. Again, there's not the differences are pretty subtle between these different ones. Window size is, again, a similar idea of how things are being kind of binned. Pretty much just higher is better there. And then the dynamic range is kind of how it's calculating what is darker. I should mention, I think it should be obvious, but the brighter, the lighter things in this color scheme are the more intense frequencies and times. So somewhere in the 120 decibel range for dynamic range is probably the way to go. But again, you could experiment with this. Like that's like so little dynamic range, you can only really tell between some sound and no sound. To yeah, so somewhere high is pretty good. And then you can have fun and play around with different color schemes too if you wanted to. But I find this kind of like default one at the top color is pretty useful. You want to make sure that use preemphasis filtering is not checked. That'll do some weird things. Um, and invert and normalize as well will give you a bit of a false sense of what the recording has. So I wouldn't recommend any of those. Okay, so now we've got the spectrogram looking about like we would want it. So our next step is to set up some keyboard shortcuts. And I realize we haven't talked about the steps that go in here, so we can circle back to this as well. But I really do want to make sure I get this in your minds of setting up keyboard shortcuts is just going to make all of this so much easier. Just setting a key to do a step so that you don't have to go find it in the menu every time is going to be really, really helpful. So again, we go to preferences, key bindings, and then we're given this long list of what keys do what things. And a lot of these are defaults. They're just set up that way already. And a lot of them can be set in a custom kind of way. And you can always search for certain commands here. So I'll give you some of what I have here, and you can always, of course, change what the actual key mapping is and all that. But just want to impress upon you how really helpful this process is. So we'll just go through a couple of the ones we're about to use here in a minute. The first one, well, the first one would be trimming, which is basically just removing pieces, like Cullen was saying, from the beginning or end. You can just use your delete key there. No special keyboard shortcut needed. The next will be normalize, and we want to make sure we use the normalize option with this dot, dot, dot. And that ellipsis indicates that it'll open up a window to give you more options, basically, which is what we want in this case. And so over here where the key is set, you can just type the key on your keyboard to set it. So we could set it to U, we could set it to B. I like it as N for normalize. That's easy for me to remember. Another one will be silence. And in this case, we want it from the generate menu because in some cases, when we want to create a break between two sections of a recording, we're going to generate a 1 second piece of silence. You might have seen this in some recordings uploaded to eBird and the Macaulay Library. And that's just indicating there's two segments of a recording that are the same bird, same place, but something happened in between them. Either you made two recordings and put them together, or you needed to remove a section as you were walking closer or a car passed or something. And so that silence is how we do that. So I have S set for that key. And then the other main one that I would set for now is move cursor to previous or next page. And I'll show you what this does in a minute, but it's a good way for moving through a recording. So I have just the left and right key respectively set for those because I find that the default left and right key, I think, just like increments you through the recording, and I don't find that very useful. I'd rather either listen to it or move in a large section. I'll show you what that means now. So as we zoom in, which I'm doing just by scrolling on the recording, if you have a scroll mouse or a two-fingered on your touchpad, you can zoom in that way. And then watch when I hit the right key, see how it's moving, not just a little bit, but the entire window is moving. I find that a nice way to kind of move through a recording if I'm trying to look through it without actually listening through the entire thing. And then I'll zoom back out. Okay, so those are some keyboard shortcuts. One thing I'll mention too, so zooming in is often very nice. I do recommend, getting used to that. And then playing and pausing, of course, is an important thing. You can go up here to the play button and press pause or stop. I really do recommend getting used to using it's usually the default is just your space bar. So if I hit the space bar, you start hearing it, and when I'm ready to stop, I'll hit the space bar again to stop it. Cool. Colin, anything you'd want to add when it comes to keyboard shortcuts or navigating within the recording?
No, I mean, I think that I guess I would just say that those keyboard shortcuts will make things go way quicker. And so it's worth taking the time to figure that out and figure out what works for you. And it doesn't really, you don't have to use the exact same ones that Jay does. I use slightly different ones, but it'll definitely make things a lot more efficient.
Great. So I'll show that one more time once we've actually seen the editing steps, but I want to get that on people's radars. And then I guess one more thing before we get into editing is just talking for a minute about evaluation, because a big advantage of doing this editing steps, it's great to we don't want to say clean them up, because I'll talk in a minute. We're not going to be doing a lot of what we call cosmetic editing. We're not trying to like remove background sounds or anything like that. We want to leave these recordings pretty natural. They'll be most useful in that way. Um, but we do want to make them a little more accessible by kind of cropping them down to the piece that is actually the recording you were trying to make. Um, and so the other big advantage of doing this, looking and listening to your recordings after the fact, is it gives you some feedback, right? If you're going out into the field, you're trying to maybe follow up on the tips we gave last time, right? You're using a microphone if you have access to it. You're trying to find a quiet place with lots of birds. You're trying to get close to the bird, right? That number one most important thing for making a better recording, getting close to the bird. You're trying to stay quiet and not move too much. You're trying to do all of that, right? But how well did you succeed? Did you remember to not move your feet? Did you remember to point your microphone and get as close to the bird as you can? It's really hard to know until you look at your recordings and listen to your recordings later, because in the field it might sound really good. And then when you get back, you might realize, oh man, I was actually moving my hand on the microphone that entire time. Or, oh, I thought it was bad, but actually, the microphone really picked up that bird well, and it was a good recording. So you can learn a lot from looking and listening to your recordings after the fact that is challenging to do when you're actually in the field. So I guess let's just talk for a minute here about what we're looking for in a recording and what we might be able to learn from that. I guess one thing that's definitely useful is sort of hearing how self noise came in. That's that handling noise, your hand on your phone or on the microphone. So listening through and looking for, a lot of these recordings are going to start with some handling noise, and that's expected. And I'll show you what we'll do about that. For example, let's listen to this recording. The very beginning, I think I was using a parabola. Parabolas are pretty like clunky when you're moving them around. So I'm guessing there's going to be some sound here at the beginning that's going to reflect that. Yeah, so hear that sound as I'm kind of just getting started, moving my parabola, getting ready to record. That's normal, and we'll trim those. But what you want to try to avoid is having that kind of sound throughout the recording. So if I were hearing that in the middle of the recording, and all throughout it, that would tell me maybe I need to think more about how I hold my microphone, how I'm holding my phone if I'm just recording with my phone. So that's something. Another is thinking about the other background sounds, the background birds, the background traffic noise. So maybe in this case, I'm listening. Okay, I've got a little handling noise at the beginning. It's a little hard to hear, so I might even just jump ahead here and normalize this a little bit, just to kind of that's about all I got. So in this case, I was focused on this chattering call, which is actually a type of tree frog that we have around here in upstate New York. Um, pretty nicely focused on that, but there is quite a lot of traffic noise in the background. In this case, there wasn't much I could do about that. It was just a place with a highway relatively nearby. But as I'm listening to these recordings, I'm thinking about it. maybe I'll think, well, next time, maybe I'll try that other marsh that's a little bit farther away, but it's farther away from the highway too. And maybe I'll get a better recording that way. And maybe that was something that I just didn't even occur to me in the field because I was there, I was hearing the frogs, I recorded them. It was great. But in retrospect, I can maybe plan to do a little bit better next time. And I guess what I'm really looking at here too, in addition to listening, is I'm looking at how loud are my target sounds. In this case, there are these frogs, compared to kind of the background sound, this kind of intermediate part. So in the case of this whippoorwill constantly singing, I'm looking to see how loud is the whippoorwill compared to this part, this quiet part. In this case, it's pretty good. So this is a pretty high quality recording with regards to that difference between the signal and the background noise. A lot of the time, here's a recording that was made on a phone that I might boost the level on, and you can see here's the signal, purple martin, and then here's all the background noise. You can see there's a lot less of a difference between that signal to the noise. In this case, because I was using my phone, the differentiation was not as great. The phone was kind of recording all the other sounds, the water noise, the other birds around. And so I'm not surprised to see that, but again, that can give me a little bit of feedback for next time, is that okay, I might have to work a little bit harder, get a little bit closer to those birds in order to get the kind of differentiation and focus that I was hoping for in a recording like that. Okay, let's go ahead and just do some actual official editing here because I think that'll be the most that'll put a lot of these things into practice and be potentially the most beneficial for everybody. Let's start with that whippoorwill recording we were looking at. So, like Cullen mentioned, essentially what we want to do are really just two steps. We want to trim the recording and we want to normalize it. And we want to do it in that order, and I'll show you why. Trimming the recording is really analogous to cropping a photo. It's essentially deciding where do I consider this recording to have started and where do I consider it to have ended. Because as you might have noticed, if you tried to do this out in the field, birds vary a lot in how much they sing. They might be singing a lot, and as soon as you point a microphone at them, they might stop for 30 seconds or a minute. And if you're patient and wait, they'll probably start up again. But you're likely to have a long period before it sings. There might be a long period after it stops when you're hoping it will sing again. And there might be handling noise or other kind of interruptions at those ends. And so what we really want to do in our preparation, our editing steps, is just focus in on what was the actual recording here. So the way we'll do that, right now we're looking at the entire recording, which is about 2.5 minutes long. And I want to start at the end or start at the beginning, sorry, and then skip to the end and sort of make that determination. Where does this recording start? So to do that, I'm going to zoom in and then jump to the beginning. So here I am at the very beginning of the recording. And this might look similar to one of these previous recordings because that's really kind of how they work, but let's just take a listen here. All right, so basically we were walking around, whatever. We heard something singing. We had a loud handling noise here because moving the parabola. And then I pointed, waited just for a couple of seconds, and the whippoorwill started singing again. Okay, so in this case, what we basically want to do is trim out anything at the beginning before we want our recording to start. And we want our recording to start ideally just a few seconds before the bird starts singing. If we don't have a couple of seconds, then we might just start it right in at the bird. In this case, basically, we for sure don't want this piece. But then we've got like 2 seconds of sort of clean background audio that we would like to keep. So in this case, see how I'm just kind of dragging to make a selection. I'm really just going to say like, here's the part we don't want. And I'm just going to hit that delete key. Trim it right out. And so now we've got a couple of seconds. And then the bird starts up. That's pretty ideal. Again, it could easily have happened that we started with our handling noise in the middle of a note, in which case we would just delete right up to that first note, and we'd start right in with the bird, and oh well, that's just how it shook out in the field. But since we do have this couple of seconds, we'll trim out this handling noise and be ready to go. So that's my beginning. Now I'll just kind of cruise through, either paging like I was showing you, or two-finger scrolling, all the way to the end. Okay, and now we've got a little bit more of a complex thing going on here. We do have some handling noise all the way at the end. So we can certainly trim that out. But we also have this part here, which has some low frequency stuff going on. And if you've looked at enough recordings, you might recognize this as being a voice announcement. So this was me saying what was happening at the end of this recording. And as we talked about in the last webinar, this is a really important part of sound recording that will let you take files that you've recorded in the past and understand what was going on in them without having to exactly remember the recording, which is pretty tough to do. So we don't have to listen to all of this, but just to get a quick sense, confirm that that's what I'm seeing.
Awesome. This last few cuts were on the same individual at the eastern end of Ransom Road now.
All right, so it's just me describing what I was recording, where I am, what the birds were doing, if anything. So I might have said the bird was unseen because it's dark out, but it was back in a brushy area around near a pond, something like that. In this case, I actually do want to preserve that voice announcement because it has some useful information in it. So I'm going to trim the end. So I'm going to delete this handling noise right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate some silence to break this voice announcement out from the main bird. Okay. And that's going to help me do this normalization step that we'll do next, which is basically making the bird louder. So to do that, I'm going to use my generate silence option S here. I'm putting 1 second of silence. That's kind of the universal indicator of something happened here. I want it to be seconds. Okay, and you can see now there's this just break of 1 second here. And then I'm going to select everything before that, and I'm going to normalize. Okay, so normalization is a sort of a complicated process, but basically making it simple, you're boosting the signal, turning up the volume up to a set point, right? Up to a maximum. And the idea is that if everybody does this with their recordings, all the recordings are at the same volume. And so you don't have to be like turning up your headphones to listen to one recording and then the next one being too loud. We want everything to be at the same volume. Then we can compare them. Everything is comparable in terms of how loud the bird is. And it's easier to listen to instead of being quiet. So to do that, I'll use my N command to open up my normalize option. And we want to normalize. We want it to be in decibels. That's how we specify exactly how loud we want it to be. And we'll set it to -3. And ready, apply. Now watch what happens, especially to the waveform here as I hit apply. See how it jumps up to like up to the top of the bar, basically. That's indicating I've gotten some good amplitude from that normalization. And we should be able to now hear it at a higher volume. Great. So why did we normalize second? Why did we do those trimming parts first instead of now, after we boosted the volume? You can boost the volume anytime you want. You can normalize anytime you want, but it's really important you also normalize after the trimming. And here's why. I'm gonna go back in time a few steps to before we did anything with trimming. If I were to normalize right now, what normalization is doing is it's looking for the loudest part of the sound, and it's bringing that part up to the volume I'm telling it to. And everything else comes along with it. So that's a really important distinction. By normalizing, we're not changing the quality of the recording in terms of whether it's a good recording or a bad recording, right? Like I was talking about the background versus the target. All we're doing is turning up the volume, making it easier to hear. It might sound worse afterwards because we have boosted that background volume, but it's actually not. It's just easier to assess. So if I do it right now, what happens? Almost nothing. And the reason for that is we've got this big handling noise over here, and that's the loudest thing, and that's what's getting normalized. So if we normalize before trimming, we're not actually really boosting the signal, because now if I trim also, we basically don't, it's just as quiet as it was before. So we have to normalize again. So that's why we do it in that order: trim and normalize. The voice announcement part, we'll do the same thing, except it doesn't need to be quite as loud as the bird. So I might bring it up to -10. The exact number isn't too important for that. But -3 for the bird is kind of the standard. So if the bird's at -10 or -3, I'm sorry, and the voice is at -10, now we've got a pretty good balance.
Awesome. This last few cuts are all the same individual.
All right. And that's the finished edited recording. Now, so I know that took, a couple of minutes to get through, but the principles of it are not too difficult, right? Decide where it starts and ends. We make a break if we need to. We normalize the different pieces, and then we're ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and take this all the way to the end here. I'm going to save it now. Now with this program, if I were to hit save right now, I am overwriting the original with this version, right? I'm making the edited version be the only version. That's potentially okay if you want to do that, assuming you have backups, but it's really helpful there are definitely going to be times where you might need to go back to a recording that you've edited. So I highly recommend doing a save as instead, which will create a new version of this same file. It'll go to save it in that same folder, which is great. That's what I want. And then I just need to give it, under the way that my things work, I give it a descriptive name that doesn't take me too long to type, so that I'll be able to see that it's edited and upload it to the correct checklist. So in this case, maybe I'll type out the whole bird name. Maybe I'll put like an S to indicate this was song versus a call or something like that. And if there were any interesting behavior, I might put something in like flying or something like that. In this case, there's really nothing to add there. And I will save it. The program will double check that I want it to be linear PCM, which is another word for wave, and resolution 32 bits, which should be how I recorded it. So this should be accurate, and I'll hit save. And so now in my folder, I've got this edited file here. Cool. Yeah, I guess so. Before we go into uploading and everything, let's take a pause. Let's see if there are any questions, or if anybody wants to see another example, or has anything to kind of add or ask about the editing process.
I have a question, Jay.
Sure.
So just clarify, did you select the section that you wanted to normalize, or did it automatically from the beginning to where you had the 1 second break?
Yeah, I manually selected it. And I'll show you, there's a couple different options there. So you can either start in the silence and kind of drag it, right? There's also some keyboard shortcuts you can set up to basically select everything before this point is the shortcut. So I'm about to hit it. Just, in my case, it's function shift left, I think. But if you have a home and end key, shift home or shift end would work. So it'll just ready and jump, and it's selected everything before that point. And then you could do the same thing with after to the right, and it selects everything. So that can be a handy way to make that selection without it having to be. But if you're zoomed out, it's not too bad to just like drag across. If I were to hit normalize with no selection, I would just normalize the entire file. And in some cases, that's fine. If I only had one little piece, that would be fine. It's only because I had these like two different sections that I needed to kind of specify which one I wanted to normalize.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing you want to be careful about is that you don't highlight just what you're looking at and normalize part of the recording, because then the sound will kind of be no longer matched, whereas like the sound will
Mm.
go up in intensity and it won't be in a natural way. And then you have to either go back or go back to the original recording to actually get that. And that's something that you don't want to have. One other thing that I'll just mention, and I think you covered it, Jay. But could you open the normalization window? So one of the
Mhm.
things you'll notice is that sometimes people skip over and they'll accidentally hit percentual instead of decibels, and then you're going to get a pretty different result where it'll be a lot quieter. And so if you're normalizing to -3 and it's like, wow, I can't really hear it, check and make sure it's on decibels, because that could be why.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, and maybe you're going to get to this, but what if you have multiple species singing in your recording? Do you decide this is my target and then you normalize for that? Like, or do you edit out or
That's a
cut out?
great, yeah, that's a great question actually, and a complicated one. But yeah, there's a couple different things. I think I even do have an example of this. There's a couple things to consider. Yeah, so basically when you're editing, when you're saying where do I want this recording to start and end, you kind of have to be doing that with a species in mind, right? Because where a recording might start and end could vary a lot depending on like what species you're editing the file for, let's say. So in this case, I've got a bunch of kind of quiet species here, all kind of throughout. And so the other option is to actually edit a recording as a soundscape, right? A recording that's kind of made to document a dawn chorus or the whole sound of an area. And so you can now, as of a few weeks ago, upload soundscape recordings to eBird checklists. So that's a great way to document the sounds around you. So if you have a recording that is relatively clean in the sense that it was very intentional, right? It wasn't just you walking, but it was you put your phone out, put your microphone out, made a recording of a minute or two, and nothing was, you weren't like pointed at a specific bird, then that could be a soundscape. Editing that would go about the same as what we saw. So in this particular case, we've got this handling noise up until about here that I'll delete. I'll jump to the end of the recording. I'll have my voice announcement.
Yeah, thank you for Bay Breasted.
Where I didn't really think I had much because I was trying for a specific species. But looking back on it, this is actually a nice soundscape. I missed a little bit of a clunk there. And now I can normalize it up. And now I've got this kind of unfocused, but still potentially really useful recording. Now, if I were instead saying like, okay, let's say it's all kind of constant, but let's just say these two songs were this Blackpoll warbler, and this was the only place it sang in the whole recording. I'd actually want to start the recording just a few seconds before that. And so a whole bunch of the recording wouldn't be my Blackpoll warbler recording, right? And the same with the end. Sings a few seconds and then delete the end. And so I kind of want to renormalize it. I want to edit with one species in mind. And so you can take the same recording. This is pretty common that happens, right? You're focused on a woodpecker, it's drumming every 30 seconds, and then a toady comes in and sings really loudly right in the middle for 20 seconds and then flies off. You end up with a long woodpecker recording and a short toady recording, and you can upload both if they're decent. But for the toady one, so if we were going to, let's just say this section is our interesting bird we want to take out, we can actually like grab a segment like this and do what's called let's see, copy it and go paste to new audio, and then we'll have a new file that's just our like middle section. And so you can essentially make multiple versions of the same recording if there were multiple things that you were focused on. I wouldn't recommend doing this with like every background species, right? Like there's just, if it's just quiet in the background, it's okay that it's not the focus of the recording. But it's pretty common that there might be multiple things happening in the same recording. Does
Great,
that
thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yes, thanks. Any other questions before Jay moves on? Feel free to just turn on your camera and microphone and
There is a question in the chat.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat. Is it acceptable if you applied a denoising process to the bird recordings?
Great question. Yeah. In a word, no. In more words, denoising, which is kind of the process of like training usually kind of some sort of AI model on what background sound is and what target sound is, and then trying to remove that background sound is a process that's used a lot for producing sounds, making them cleaner. For the purposes of why we all, I suspect, are interested in sound recording, that can be kind of a dangerous proposition because we don't really know what that program is doing to the recording. And because we want these recordings to be useful for as many things as possible, right? We want them to be nice for birders to listen to. We want them to be useful for training Sound ID and public engagement in that way. We want them to be useful for taxonomic studies like Cullen was showing with the nightjar and the crow, for a researcher to be able to analyze it. We don't want to make them too artificial. And so this, what we call light editing, like I'm showing here, where trimming, normalizing, pretty much not doing much else, that's about all we recommend doing with the recordings that you're uploading to eBird. Because otherwise you can change the quality of the sound, of the background sounds, of the foreground, the target sounds, and we just don't really have a way to know what happened there. So yeah, recommend for what you're uploading to eBird. Don't worry if it's a little noisy, right? Like most recordings are going to have some background noise, and that's fine. But essentially, like the way to get better recordings, make your recording sound better, is to do it in the field. And everything we're doing now is making your natural recordings just easier to access. It's a great question, though.
I would kind of mention that some of this does depend a little bit on what your goal is. Now, we are an archive that wants to make things, wants to maximize the value of a recording, and you can always add a filter. You can't add that information back in. Now, if you were trying to create a very clean spectrogram, just for some reason, you might want to do that. But I would keep the original, so that you could always go back to that and have the full recording. And so again, I guess a little bit of it depends on what you're trying to do. But yeah, especially for a scientific archive like ours, we really want to have as much as possible the original recording, because that has the most value for the most uses for research and other things.
Totally. Cool. Well, yeah, so we'll have more time after in a few more minutes, but let's jump ahead to our last section here, and then we can really dive in with stuff. So our last section is uploading recordings, right? This important final step. Before we do that, why don't I do just a quick recap and just get a couple more recordings edited here. Hopefully I wasn't moving too fast for people before, but I do want to just kind of like mention, a lot of this is muscle memory, right? It's learning to click the button, learning which keyboard shortcut, where to make that decision. And so it's as much kind of your hands learning the buttons as it is you learning the steps. And so if, once you've had some practice, it's pretty easy to say, jump to the beginning of the recording, cut that, jump to the end. This is voice announcement. We don't need, cut that, see the whole recording, normalize it, and save it. And that's as long as it necessarily needs to take to edit a recording like that, if you sort of know what was going on there. Let's do one more. I'll go at a medium speed this time. Here's a recording where I have two sections. It's a recording of purple martins. And I have two files. I have one file here and then a second file here with a voice announcement at the end.
3 female type purple martins circling very.
And what I want to do is I want to combine these two recordings because it was essentially one recording. I made a recording, I stopped, I walked a little bit closer, and I made another one. This one was made with my phone. And I want to combine them because they're the same recording. Having them be two separate files doesn't really help anything. So what I'll do is I'll start with the first one. I'll decide where it starts. First calls are there, so I'll delete this couple of seconds. I'll scroll to the end. Still hearing it towards the end, no bad handling noise. So my trimming is pretty much done. So next step, normalize. -3 is what I want. Apply. And now you can see this loudest thing, which hopefully is the bird. It is, good. Has been the thing. If this weren't the bird, quick aside, if this were a click or a handling noise or something like that. We've talked about trimming, right? Trimming is only at the ends. I do not want to trim out from the middle because what we've done now is we've created this break in time that didn't actually exist. It'll sound weird when the background sound just changes. And so we want to be really careful about removing things from the middle of a recording. It's better to have some noise in the middle of recording, and that's okay, than to create a situation that didn't exist, right? We really, again, we want these to be scientifically accurate. So we don't want to be sort of manipulating the recording in a way that's going to create a false picture of what actually happened in the field.
I mean,
Okay.
if there is a case where there's like, a section in the middle that you don't want to include and you absolutely want to take it out, you can leave a second of silence like you do between other recordings. That is an option too, but you do lose that information of frequency and the frequency of sound that has value.
Yep. Yeah. So if there's something in the middle that is so, obnoxious that it's just, you're just not willing to live with it, you can take that and make it to be 1 second of silence, like Colin said, and then you've got 2 sections of the same recording, and that's perfectly fine. And in this case, I have 2 files, but I just as easily could have walked closer in the middle of my file and chosen to do the same thing, remove that middle part, but replacing it with a second of silence rather than pretending it didn't exist, if that makes sense. So here's my first edited file. Now I'll jump to the second one, not saving this one yet, and do the same thing. Beginning. There's the first call, just a couple seconds in. That's fine. Skip to the end. Here's my voice announcement. I want to separate it with a second of silence. I want to normalize it to -10. Make it a little quieter. Doesn't need to be that loud. Grab the bird, normalize that to -3. Okay, now I've got my second edited file, and now I'm going to put them together as one file. I'm going to do that. I'm on my second file. I'm going to just hit Command C or copy. I guess maybe I need to have the whole thing selected first. Copy. First file. I'm going to put silence, but now at the end, and then paste it in. And so now I've got 3 segments: first file, second file, and voice announcement. If you want to upload the 2 recordings like that separately, that's okay too. But it is nice because in this case, I'm explicitly saying these were all the same birds, and that can be kind of a valuable piece of information. Then do a save and name the file. Purple Martin, 3 birds call. All right. And just for good measure, I already did. Yeah, I already saved the soundscape. Okay, so 3 recordings to upload now. Soundscape plus 2 birds. Find your checklist. You always want to have an eBird checklist. That's your portal to contributing this media to eBird and the Macaulay Library. So keep an eBird checklist in the field. If you have media not associated with an eBird checklist, you can always create like a historical checklist. But going forward, the best thing to do is to just keep a checklist in the field. That'll be useful data for eBird and all these population models, as well as, giving you this platform for finding your recording. So you go to your actually we'll just go to my eBird, you go to manage my checklists, and then find it from the list or use a filter to figure out where it was. So in this case, we find a checklist from the end of May that I made here in New York, and we can click the Add Media button to start adding media. And then I find it's just easiest to drag it in from a folder, but you can also navigate to it by going to Add Media. So we'll upload our whippoorwill to the appropriate place. We'll upload our purple martin to the appropriate place. And we'll put our soundscape up in this new habitat soundscape section. You'll notice there's also places for other animals. So that frog recording we were looking at, we could have uploaded here. I can also look and just happen to see like, oh, here's a couple of photos I took of the habitat. So let's throw those in too under that same category. They'll get assigned habitat. And while those upload, I'll just think about what data I want to be adding. So a lot of the most important metadata for these recordings is already going to be assigned just by adding it to a checklist, right? The species, the location, including latitude and longitude, and the date and approximate time. So that's all taken care of just by choosing the checklist. Although note that it is very important you choose the correct checklist because otherwise some or all of that information could be wrong. And then the other metadata that we get to apply are median notes. That was what Colin was showing some pretty elaborate examples of that. A lot of the time you might not have so much to say about a recording, but again, if there was anything noteworthy about this recording that you or somebody else listening to it might want to know in a day, a month, a year, this is the place to put it. So I might say 3 individuals, 3 female plumaged individuals flying around over the spit calling. Then I can add whether I think these were song or calls. In this case, I'm familiar with the Purple Martin song, and it's more elaborate. These were just calls as they flew around, so I'm confident putting that. This is pretty helpful if you know it, but don't just guess. Though you can always like open up the eBird species page and take a listen and say, okay, that's the song. So I think these were calls. Yes. To get a better sense. If you use playback or not, this would be the place to put that. That's an important piece of information. If you know how many individuals were involved, so I'm just going to assume this is pretty early in the season. They were all real brown-throated birds. I'm going to say these were all adult females, and there were 3 of them. Give yourself a rating. Try to take into account that there's everywhere from, very, very noisy, bad cell phone recordings all the way up to amazing parabola recordings where there's no background sound. So in this case, I can see and hear the bird pretty well, but there's a lot of this gray background. So I would rate this a 2 or a 3-star recording based on that. And then any additional behaviors that were happening, in this case, flying applies. They were in flight the whole time, but nothing else really. And then I want to note my equipment because that can be really helpful in figuring out why a recording sounds the way it does. In this case, it was just with my phone. So I'll add that there. And then once I've done that, the recording will show up on my checklist with all of that metadata. And the Macaulay Library page will reflect all of that as well, including the location, other things on the same checklist, et cetera, et cetera. So adding this metadata is a really important sort of completing the cycle of uploading these, of making these recordings, right? Making it in the field, evaluating it, trimming and normalizing to make it accessible, and then putting it into your checklist. You will always have the option to download it yourself. So it's also essentially kind of a free cloud backup of your file. And then anyone else will be able to find it in the media search among the other nearly 3 million recordings and access it that way. So that was kind of the whirlwind version of uploading a sound. But yeah, we've got a little over 15 minutes left. So let's I guess open it up to questions again, see if anybody has anything they would want to share or discuss about that or anything else that we've talked about so far this past hour. We've got one question here. What processing takes place when you upload audio to eBird? Not too much. So we are, for one thing, storing your original file in its full resolution, exactly how you upload it. That's how we store it. That's we refer to ourselves as an audio archive. That is the archived version. That is the version you get if you click that download button. So really important that we always store the high resolution version. We recommend people record uncompressed files, upload them as WAV files. That's what we store. And then we also create a lower resolution MP3, which is what you would listen to when you click the play button. And that's so that we can stream it to, somewhere without good internet or things like that, a little bit lower profile version, even though we want the original to be high resolution. And then we run that MP3 through a spectrogram processing software that creates the black and white spectrogram that you see on the checklist and in the search page. So no additional processing other than that.
I mean, which just mentioned is that it's a nice service that anything you upload to Macaulay Library, you have access to. So if something happens to your hard drive or your backup or whatever, you always have that available for download, and it's always accessible.
Yep. Yeah, and I don't really have my own recording library. Like as you saw, I name my files and I edit them, but my goal is to put them on the Macaulay Library through eBird, because then I know I can go in and find them at any point. I could download them, I can listen to them, I can see what did I record in May of 2025 all through there. I don't need my own sort of audio cataloging software because I put it in my checklists and I let Macaulay Library do that for me. Robert says he uses a DSLR camera with a Sennheiser microphone. Always a hum present, even in the recordings where the mic was not properly connected. Yeah, it sounds like it might be kind of inherent to your equipment. There are certain you might try if it has a cable that can be swapped out. You might try a different cable, as that kind of feedback or interference can often be related to the cable. But yeah, nothing. I'd have to see a recording to better diagnose what might be going on there.
I mean, it's worth noting that with any gear, there is going to be some level of noise introduced through the gear. But higher quality gear, that's going to be less. Um,
Yeah. Anyone else? Has anyone tried to go out and go recording after the first webinar or just in general? Has anyone uploaded any recordings in the last couple of months?
So I'll share, Jay, that I've only uploaded about a dozen recordings to eBird, and I hope to do more in the future. But all I did was trim them, like, cut out something that wasn't needed at the beginning or the end. I didn't do any normalizing or put them through editing software. I mean, is that terrible or is that better than nothing? Like, how do you regard that?
Yeah, better than nothing, right? Like none of the steps that I went through today ultimately affect the data that's in the recording. They're just kind of focus and make it more accessible. So trimming is a great first step, right? If you were going to choose one, that would probably be the one to do, because that really clearly says this is the piece of the recording. This is the recording that I meant to make. and you're not confused by the minute beforehand that doesn't have it in it or something like that. And then the normalizing is just kind of an added benefit. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't say, oh no, those are trash, go back and redo them or anything like that. It's more just, yeah, going forward, these are the best steps to take. Madiel has recorded a bullfinch and the lizard cuckoo in Puerto Rico. Excellent. Those are great.
Does anybody have any planned recording trips that they're planning to take, or species they're hoping to record?
Feel free to turn your camera on and say hi too.
Yeah, don't be shy, guys. Turn your camera on. It'll be a conversation. We don't want to be the only ones with our faces showing.
I find all the birds decide to sing and call at the same time, making it difficult to get more focused recordings. Very impressed on how focused your recordings are.
Yeah, definitely. It's a challenge, right? Like not just noisy places, but if you find a singing bird, there's probably some other ones around. So
And
part of that is using a more directional microphone, like a shotgun microphone or a parabola helps a huge amount. But yeah, just trying to get close to the birds and find a place where there's not too much else going on helps a lot too. Once recording has been edited, can it be changed or re-edited? Um, yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, not really. Once it's up there, it's kind of that's the version. You can always download it and re-edit it and upload it again if you wanted to. Like I was telling uh, other Lisa here, it's probably not a big deal unless unless you feel like you really uh, did something bad to it the first time. But if it was just like, oh, I didn't normalize it, probably better just to leave it as is. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no direct way to like replace it with a new version without kind of losing the catalog number and the metadata that's already been added. But you can do that if you want to. So.
Hi.
Hey, Mary.
Hi.
How are you? I have a question with regards to the uh annotations. Is it okay to include other species in the that you're hearing in the recording? Oftentimes I listen to recordings and I like to know personally what are some of the other birds that are in that
Totally.
particular audio. Is that acceptable or?
Oh yeah, no, more than acceptable, I would say. Encouraged.
Okay.
Um, yeah, like putting it in your voice announcement at the end makes sense if you were kind of like in the moment and you say, okay, well, there's also a black whiskered, particularly if there's going to be like some confusion later on, is when it's most helpful to say like, okay, the Jamaican vireo was the soft little chur calls, but then the louder song was mostly from black whiskered vireo, things like that. But
Okay.
also just kind of listing them. And in fact, I'll share my screen real quick. I didn't do this in the time, but if I were being more painstaking about this, particularly with the soundscape, but also with the other things, I would put this additional species field here is actually made just for that.
Mhm.
It looks at everything on your checklist and it allows you to say, okay, there was also a yellow warbler in the background, and there was also whatever else you were hearing, an American goldfinch. And then when you actually look at the recording, like you were saying, you get to see those listed. And that's
Ah,
helpful for everyone.
nice.
I'll also add that if there's something in the background and you're not sure what it is, you can also add notes about that to the media notes. It's like that loud sound, I think was a squirrel, but I'm not sure, but it wasn't the target species. Saying what can provide context that'll help other people interpret it, even if you're not 100% sure. You can add that. The other thing I would
Excellent.
the other thing I would add is that we recently added the ability to upload like habitat photos. Additional species really helps with that too, to know what species we're using that habitat. And so that additional species field is really helpful so that people can find that media. And the more you can add those background species and additional species to that field, it'll really add value to that media.
Excellent. Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so Lisa just linked to a spreadsheet with sort of a priority species for the Caribbean and some kind of our current how many recordings we have of those from the time being. So, I mean, I would say if you're getting into recording and, any recording is valuable. There's so many different things that can be done with it. Even a bird that's very widespread, like a bananaquit, like might sound different on each island, right? So there might be 1,000 recordings of bananaquits in the Macaulay Library archive, but maybe there's only 20 of them from Jamaica or whatever island you're on. So even common birds are worth recording. But if the challenge kind of appeals to you, then going and finding something, there's only 25 recordings of Vitaline warbler, only 21 of Lesser Antillean tanager. There's a lot of Caribbean species are kind of underrepresented in terms of, a lot of them are only found on these small islands. So it makes sense they don't have as many recordings as the more widespread species, but there's a lot of opportunities, no matter what island you're on, to make a difference in the representation of these species. So really exciting opportunity, I think.
Now I have another question, if I may ask. Um, uh, I've used Raven, and is that something okay for processing
Yeah, that's a good
audio? I
question.
mean, okay.
So Raven is another program that we develop here at the Cornell Lab in a different department. It's really great for analysis, right? It's really made for measuring sound and doing these kind of like looking at sound and measuring it. It's not so good at the processing steps,
Mhm.
where something like Ocean Audio or one of these is really much more made for, the chopping and dicing of the recordings. So I've found Raven to be a bit challenging to do these steps in, just because it's really just not made for that. It's a visualizer rather than an editor. So you could certainly try, and you can definitely, at least the trimming part is doable there. Normalization isn't really a concept that they support as in the sense that we do. So you could, but I would probably just recommend one of these other free programs as being a little sleeker for that. I'll put the Ocean
Awesome.
Audio link in the chat here too, just so people have it. Though again, if you're already using Audacity or some other sound editor, feel free to keep going with that. Ocean Audio isn't better than those necessarily. It's just a good place to start if you don't have experience. What island are you on, Mary?
The Dominican Republic.
Nice.
And I have probably close to 1,300 recordings, which I need to process,
Nice.
um, all associated with eBird checklists, but it's just, it's a more time-consuming process than I find, photo editing, photo editing is so much faster. So
Right.
yeah, but
Well, if you can, once you may already have this set up, but when you get those quick links set up and you get some practice, it can actually go pretty quick,
yeah.
It's but
Yeah, that's what I needed. I needed something faster. Like, I've used Audacity, but I think I like, Ocean Audio seems like a nicer interface
Mm.
than
Mhm.
Audacity. So
Yeah, I find it a little bit more intuitive just because you're kind of looking at one file at a time versus having things on a lot of channels, but it's
yeah,
kind of just
yeah,
whatever you're used to. Yep.
excellent.
Cool. Well, it looks like we're just about at time here. Any parting thoughts, Lisa?
No, I'm definitely inspired and hope to do a lot more when I get out into the field in the Caribbean. I've got a couple trips coming up to St. Vincent and Grenada, so I might have to tack on a day to do some sound recording. Definitely inspired and hope to help out, and I hope everybody else is too. And thank you so much, everybody, for your interest and participating in this webinar. And we hope to, check back in with you. We're going to have, we think our next international conference will be in Trinidad in late July 2026. And so maybe we'll bring Jay and Colin down to that to do like a in-person workshop, which would be really awesome. So yeah, we want to do more because we definitely want to help Merlin Sound ID improve for the Caribbean. It needs some improvement. So it's up to all of us to make that happen.
Totally.
So yeah, thank you. Big thank you to Colin and Jay for this part 2 webinar. And do you want to make the announcement one more time about the annotating session tonight?
Yeah, do you have that open, Colin?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Fabricio, are you still online? I don't have
Sure.
that power.
Yeah, I can copy and paste the links here.
That's great.
and just to clarify, the idea there is it's a weekly session that they run out of Peru, but any Spanish speaker is welcome to join, where they kind of just go over sound editing, essentially the same things we showed today, but in a kind of a collaborative space. So tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern, I think, right? They're going to do essentially what I just did, but in Spanish. And so, join them there to check that out if you didn't understand what I was saying.
That's great.
Well, thank you. That was fantastic.
Great.
Yeah,
Very
great.
helpful.
Really great, guys. Thank you so much. And we'll stay in touch with all of you. Take care.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.